Welcome to Unsuitable on Rea Radio, the award-winning financial services and business advisory podcast that challenges your old-school business practices and the traditional business suit culture. Our guests are industry professionals and experts who will challenge you to think beyond the suit and tie while offering you meaningful modern solutions to help you enhance your company's growth. I'm your host, Dave Kane. Since we started producing Unsuitable on Rea Radio, we've had a lot of individuals, businesses, and even other CPA firms ask us how to get things off the ground. First, the people you have working behind the scenes are essential. Beyond that, we thought it would be pretty cool if we could dedicate an episode of Unsuitable to help others who may be considering adding a podcast, blog, or other content marketing to their own marketing mix and strategy. For this episode, I've brought in the big guns. I've expanded the budget. Our guests today are no strangers to the podcasting world. I have Brad Circone, former rock star, branding guru, and the producer of Unsuitable, joining us on this episode, along with the one, the only, and the former host of our podcast, Mark Van Benschoten. Brad and Mark will walk us through a bit of the history of Unsuitable while providing you with some insight, best practice tips that will help you secure your own podcasting success. Welcome back to Unsuitable, Brad and Mark.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
Good. First of all, I want to make sure that I pronounced the names correctly. Were we okay?
You were close. I only knew you for 9 years, but you did okay.
I was a little concerned about pronouncing Brad and Mark. That's what the trouble was.
Yeah, those monosyllabic words.
So let's get started. You guys are both creative and musical, talented, but let's start off with something kind of fun. What's your favorite go-to rock tune of all time? Brad, let's start with you first.
The Clash, London Calling.
Mark?
I would have to say Shooting Star by Bad Company.
I had you pegged for like the Archies, Sugar Sugar or something like that. Does that be more appropriate?
I'm not as old as you, so probably not.
Good. Well, today we're going to talk about podcast and how Rea and Associates get started in the podcast world. And I kind of remember a story. Maybe we can share the story with our listening audience. Mark, I'll start with you. Do you remember where this idea was hatched?
I do, and my memory might not be 100% on, so I'm sure Brad will correct me. But I think in a local adult establishment, adult as they serve mixed drinks, not the other kind of adult. And we were just sitting around talking and just about different ideas and opportunities and how to be creative. And Brad mentioned it there. And I thought it was an interesting idea. I didn't know how it would work, how you would try to make how many tax updates can you do in a month and keep it interesting. And Brad, kind of coached me along as to that really is not what we would going for.
I remember that day. We were on the west side of the bar, and Brad began to coach us through this. Do you remember that, Brad? Do you remember that discussion?
I do.
Thanks for that expanded answer, by the way.
I do, and I was surprised that you guys were, first of all, open and excited about the idea. So, that was interesting to me because podcasting still is not established, as a main marketing tool for most companies, especially not professional services.
I remember in the sharing with Mark in the early days of the conversation when he brought it back to the marketing team, and I think their first words were, "You got to be effing crazy," and then he took it to the operations committee. And they said, "You got to be effing crazy." Do you remember those discussions?
I do. Then we took it to Becca. She said yes, so we did it.
Yeah.
That's the power of Becca.
Speaking of effing, have you had effing vodka?
Yes, effing years ago.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yes, it effing is. It is good.
So the first.
I have not.
The
alphabet.
So the
by
first
alcohol.
the first challenge, if you will, to get this off the ground is you had to sell it. You had to sell it internally.
Yes. I mean, it was, something unique to me. I mean, I don't, what kind of ROI do you have on marketing? How's this going to play out? What are we trying to accomplish? I just tend to operate well, this is something that I would like to do. I think it would be fun. I like to hear myself speak, so I was all in. But that's where Brad was very helpful and had an audience with our marketing team and Becca as to here's what we could accomplish. But it was a sales job. I agree.
In the beginning. But I think the thing that's important to know is that there are a lot of bad podcasts, and that all they do is spew information. And one thing that I said right away when we were sitting on the west side of the bar that day was, with your guys' personality and the kind of company you are, I think if we brought that towards the forefront and make it entertaining, not informational first, entertaining first, informational second, that it would fit perfectly with your personality.
Brad, I think you put it in the framework of it's content marketing. Forget that it's a podcast. It's a piece of your marketing strategy. Would you concur with that, Brad?
Yeah, and I think anything, it is hard. It's hard to market professional services in differentiated ways. It is. So you do a newsletter. So, you underwrite a couple community events. Well, there's a lot of clutter in those spaces doing that. Hence, when we change the medium and move it to a podcast, now we take the 100, the other 100 accounting firms that aren't doing podcasts, and we're not competing with anybody. That was the idea.
I come at it from a different, slightly
I didn't
different.
ask you, when your turn to talk.
Much like home, I'm talking whenever I want. I enjoyed when we did it is that it showed us. I mean, I agree it is marketing and it's part of our marketing strategy, but it showed us to be who we are: fun, knowledgeable, personable, breadth of knowledge, breadth of expertise. And to me, that's why I really enjoyed doing it. It was us. Here's just one way to show us being us in a different venue.
Where did you? I think maybe it was Brad that came up with the title of unsuitable. Was that your mind?
No, that was actually Becca's team came up with the title unsuitable.
The Clash, huh?
No, they didn't have that, but yes.
The unsuitable. So that was a.
The approachability, I think, is what they were going after. The approachability, the friendliness of the firm. Though we're knowledgeable and have a wide breadth of services, we're also very approachable and down to earth and humble, and that's what our roots are, and that's part of the Rea way.
Brad, one of the things I've heard you talk to us about is get it right behind the scenes, and I look at that as kind of the production model, and for our listeners, they're probably thinking, well, how do you get started? What do you do? Can you talk about getting it right behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think that what's great, obviously, about working with the business development team is that they actually are invested in strategy, not just thinking about, okay, well, if we do 18 podcasts, what's our ROI? Dave, can you get back in your seat? The bottles are clanking. Put the waitress down and come back to your seat. Thank you. So I just think a big part of that behind the scenes was that philosophically we were all on the same level, and that we had a long-term strategy for podcasting, not let's try it 3 or 4 times and see how it plays out. Secondly, I think we all looked at podcasting as a voice or a reflection or a tone of the firm, and I think that was what Mark was stating just a few minutes ago. And I think having a bigger picture of what podcasting can do behind the scenes before you open your mouth on the mic is a sound strategy. And I think thirdly, we all like the idea of kind of jumping off the ship and doing something a bit more adventuresome because the firm does have a personality, and it's one way to talk about or write about the firm's personality, but when you hear it in this medium, it's more believable.
And you mentioned this as well, the people behind the scenes, the marketing team at Rea and Associates, hats off to them. I mean, they do a lot of work behind the scenes and nobody sees and hears, and that's part of what makes it work, the content marketing.
Yes.
And again, I think we have to congratulate them because they have received nominations in several awards within the accounting profession and outside the accounting profession. So hats off to the marketing team. You have to have somebody that's very knowledgeable and wants to step out of the norm.
And enjoys doing that.
Can I speak now?
Yes, like it.
Go right ahead.
Like you're at the
Mark,
house.
Mark Van Benschoten will be on the mic next.
Well, if it wasn't for the marketing team at Ray, it never would have got off the ground. We could have gone to Becca and her team, and she would have said, no, it's not going to happen, or she had to carry the weight, because I'm sure at some point somebody pulled her aside and says, should we be doing this? And she could have given it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So to take a chance, I think I think that's one thing about Ray, is it allows people to fail, and failing is not always, terrible. If you're not failing, then you're probably not stretching yourself enough. So, and the firm allowed Becca to go forward with the project. I think that's just another sign of the firm and the quality of the firm.
Concur.
Well, Mark, I want to stay with you on a couple things. As the first host of the podcast, it was pretty difficult.
It is.
Would you say?
It was the day of the month I really enjoyed the most, but I was nervous. And to keep it interesting, to keep the dialogue going, it's harder than you think. Yes.
You're
You're doing a
have to
good
do
job, though.
And you have to do your homework.
Yes, you had to be prepared, and you never knew where the conversation was going to go, or to be able to listen to think at the same time, and that's hard for me. It is. So I enjoy listening to you. You do a fine job, but it's not as easy as one would think.
Well, you blazed the trail, so I owe it to you. But
I set the bar low, in other words.
sound quality is also vital as you go through, and the quality of the equipment. And Brad, this is probably in your in your question box here. How do you maintain the sound quality?
I just think a lot of it, whether it's sound quality, whether it's the other dimensions we're adding with photography or video components, it's all part of the brand. I mean, when Ray does something as a company, whether it's professionally or in a community, it's done at a premier first-class level. So why not do the same thing when venturing out in this medium? But I think the big point is, whether it's behind the scenes or whether it's how we're promoting or moving the podcast forward, it's all about curating content that is entertaining and unique to share with people in a mobile world now.
But your comment about quality is important. You don't want to listen to something that's all garbled or staticky. But I don't find it to be expensive, and I don't even know what it costs. But I view it to be a low cost quality production that other people can do.
Yep, agreed. No, many businesses can. The problem is they don't make a decision to do it one way or other for two reasons. I mean, we talk about all these accounting terms of mitigating risk, right? Same is true as marketing. The risk is, do we have a personality that can actually sit behind the mic and host the show? That is the number one barrier. The second one is, how do we count sales conversions, right? So these first two things, do we have someone behind the mic that can be entertaining? And how do we count sales conversions? Most companies won't take that high risk. It's a high risk. And then the third thing, and the most important thing, is how do we editorialize this? This is a lot of work behind the scenes every week to say, this month we're doing this month, right? And so they don't have any experience in editorializing that, and I think that's the third thing.
So I think what you're also saying in there is that you have to be consistent.
Yes.
Consistency is critical with a podcast program.
I agree. There's podcasts that I listen to, and they come out on Thursday, and I know when I drive to work on Friday, that's the podcast I'm going to listen to, and it bothers me when I get up in the morning and they have not loaded their next episode. So I like the consistency that you guys have, that we've continued. It's there. People can anticipate that it's going to be there, and it's there. Jumping back to your thing about the personality, I think it's also does the firm have the personality to do this?
The brand.
The brand, to take that risk, to say, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna do this. Every day, every podcast can't be your personal best, and are you okay with that? And I think the organization needs to have that personality, that brand to do that.
What's your recommendation, Brad, on how long an episode should be?
Well, 14 and a half minutes.
14 and a half minutes?
Well, many episodes of many other podcasters are they can be 40 minutes to 2 hours. I just think in professional services, to keep it entertaining without swallowing too much information, I think what we're doing that idea between 20 and 25 minutes is perfect. And I want to go back to Mark's point about the company being willing, the brand being willing to say, we think our culture, we have a culture, as we were talking about in the previous podcast, that we have a culture that will actually allow us a platform to do podcasting. So I think that is a huge driver in deciding whether or not you should do it. It's not that it's that complicated. Does your culture fit the medium?
And again, I think you hit it. It's just not a podcast, but it's part of marketing strategy, which is content marketing. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. But give it a try. I mean, we had some failures early. We did. We really did.
Episodes 1 through 50?
Yeah.
But and again, remembering
another job.
Would you guys listen for your next question?
Sorry.
And I remember early on when this came out, you're like, and Brad, you made the statement, I can get you on iTunes. And Mark and I thought, wow, that is really cool, until we found out anybody can get on iTunes.
Right.
But we thought we were going to get royalties.
Right. No, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. No.
So again, talk to me about Brad as far as ongoing strategy with podcast.
Well, I think obviously what the business development group is already doing is perfect, and that is this idea, and you hear the word all the time now in content marketing, which is curate. I mean, we have the content. You can't be everywhere, Dave, with your personality. Mark couldn't in his time, and this gives us a way to promote, post, and publish, and cut up these pieces of content and use them at the marketing team's will, when and how they need to use them. Which, if you think about it, I was thinking about before we were doing the podcast, I was thinking about what's the difference between 20 years ago in advertising and marketing and today. And it's quite fascinating, because we would have picked up the dispatch, right? We would have had a cassette tape going into a CD, right, in those times, and we would have cut out things from magazines. Now we talk about this idea of video or audio curating published work. So all we've done is created mobility to the old advertising package. It's just mobile now.
Mark, I want to go back to you and maybe change direction a little bit as the host. Somebody out there is thinking about a podcast and they were going to be the host. What would your recommendations be? Do you have a couple real good ideas?
Take your time, prepare, mentally think through the first few minutes of the podcast. How's it going to go? Make sure you understand what your intro is going to be. Maybe have a couple of questions teed up, and just to think about that and not be nervous. I mean, it's just hopefully it's a conversation. That's the way I tried to address it. And just to be inquisitive, let somebody else speak. I've been told, again at home, that I talk over people. But so try not to do that, and to take your time would be my first suggestion.
Mark, another one right for you. Maybe this is a fastball right down the middle, but what do you do when maybe somebody's cell phone goes off, or you stutter, or you cough,
breathe heavy,
like a goat?
Yeah. Goat Van Benschoten.
You just go with it. One of the best things that I think the best, personally speaking, is we were recording and a car alarm was going off in the parking lot, and I just started on this little riff about how alarming the subject matter was, and I thought I was so funny, but nobody else ever said anything to me about it, and I thought it was just great.
No, that's not true. We did think it was very funny.
You're a legend in your own mind.
Yes, I am.
That's the story he tells at home and why he can't talk.
So we're all human. We're all see humor. Just to go with it, to be comfortable with it. You can always stop and record. We had to do that once. It was because of me. But that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the show that you're human and you make a mistake. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Going back to the equipment, and this is for Brad. Are we allowed to drop the mic?
Yes. But you have to hand it to Abby first. She controls all mic dropping. But you can do it, yes, like the new Verizon spots. They're pretty good.
You can do that.
You can do that.
Now let's go back to we're jumping around a little bit, but get it right behind the scenes. And want to kind of go back to that where we started. Is that obviously kind of go back through some of your key points. You know, your marketing team, they did a lot of the legwork and got the content right. So that's one thing you really need to do. What about a budget on this? I mean, if somebody's starting one of these off, what would you recommend they do from a budget perspective?
I would say it depends on how they're looking at their other media or marketing expenditures. So I would get a list of all inventory expenditures with their prospective ROI, some of which they can, some of which they can't, such as golf outings. Or other things that are line item budgets, and say, so how much direct business do we get from that? And then I would create a budget in podcasting based on what you think that ROI means. And I think there's two kinds of ROI. I think there's ROI in a business sense for sales transactions and how much does it do for the firm or the professional services. Then I think there's even a more important ROI, and that is the culture, the internal culture. What does having a podcast do to ignite and unify the brand voice internally that this is out here?
Our guests today have been Brad Circone and Mark Van Benschoten. And thanks again for joining us on Unsuitable, guys. It's been great, and we just scratched the surface, and there's a lot more stuff that can happen. There's a lot going on at creating a podcast, and you guys started it, and thank you very much for getting that off the ground, along with the Rea marketing team who's sitting here with us, and I think they just finished a bottle of wine, so they're celebrating.
They did.
You know, and as soon as we get off air, we might have a cocktail or two.
Mark might.
But again, there's a lot going on in creating a podcast, and we hope our listeners grab some of that information. And as always, we've got some great tips and insight available at raycpa.com. And if you still haven't subscribed to Unsuitable on iTunes, I have only one question. What the hell are you waiting for? Until next time, I'm Dave Kane, encouraging you to loosen up your tie and think outside the box.
It's good. It was entertaining.
Yeah, well,